It's Bill Buckley here, and in a world obsessed with youth, it is perhaps no wonder that as we age, some of us are inclined to panic. If you won't see 40 again, my next guests can offer you a much-needed tonic. You Part 2 is a book by husband and wife Campbell and Jane McPherson. Kirsty Young has described it as an invigorating and inspiring guide to the rest of your life, which isn't bad going. Hello, Campbell and Jane.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, Bill.
Well, thank you. Nice of you to be with us on the show today. What is your definition of midlife, first of all? Can you put an age on it, or is it a fairly elastic thing?
I think it's very elastic. In fact, in the book, we talk to a number of athletes and sports people who start their second part, if you like, their part two, at the ages of 20s and 30s. But fundamentally, it's written for people our age and a bit younger, 45 plus, looking at, okay, we've done all these wonderful things in the first half. What are we going to do that's equally as magical in the second?
So Jane, just remind us what are all these wonderful things I did and didn't even realise I was doing them at the time.
Yeah, I was wondering what he meant by that as well. We write about it in the book that, we have accumulated, by the time we get to our sort of mid-40s, a lot of experience. A lot of us have been in full-time employment. A lot of us have formed relationships. We've had children. We've had ups and downs with relationships and with we've had a lot of experience. A lot of things have happened in the world around us that are good and bad. And we're sort of in this place in our sort of mid-40s onwards where things are starting to change a lot in terms of our own personal relationships, maybe with our children starting to leave home, suddenly becoming more independent. I work a lot with women who are facing menopause issues, and that has been a huge amount of change in a woman's life. And so, there's, but we like to think of it as a positive transition, and we try not to be, too cheesy about it, but actually there's so much that we can build on that experience moving into the second half of our lives.
Okay, well let's talk through one or two of those things then, and obviously you can't give us the detailed ways to deal with them, otherwise there'd be no point in writing a whole book, but some pointers to get us started would be great. You mentioned there, for example, kids leaving home. Now there might be a tendency to sort of get the champagne out and think, wow, finally, my duty is done. But other than that, then what do I need to know why do I even need to navigate it? I suppose I'm really asking.
Well, that's one of the big changes of identity that happens, and identity is a major source of purpose and of fulfillment in life. And when kids leave home, our identity changes. Just like when we get made redundant, our identity changes. And so what we talk about in the book is how to detach, which is really one of Jane's yoga philosophies, how to detach from it, look at it and adopt the right attitude to seize the opportunities. So everything in the second half won't be perfect. And we did get the champagne out when our kids left home, but then
one of them came back again.
One of them came
back. They do these days,
we
don't they?
Which I think is more and more common, exactly. Particularly given the last few years. Yeah.
But it's about attitude.
Well, yes, and it's about expectation, I think, as well, isn't it? Because you think, much as I love them, finally I won't have to moan about the mess or the noise, or, won't have to plan a meal every night for five. We just the two of us can go out to dinner whenever we like. Oh, it's going to be all wonderful. And then I suppose, like all things, Jane, it's not quite as wonderful as you think it will be.
No, and as I say, I think it's not as linear as that, is it?
No,
because
our
children come back, they're facing their own challenges. We're also facing challenges with our parents that are getting older. So I talk a lot with women about nurturing, and yes. Children are leaving, and you could think, great, yippee, I don't have to look after or do the cooking and all the rest of it. But actually, we're also looking after our older parents who are, living much, much longer than they used to. So the nurturing certainly isn't over, and that can be quite tough. But or also throw in a few hormones that are changing as well. A lot of hormones that are changing in menopause, and you've got a perfect storm, really.
I love this word, which I assume you have invented, which is the menopause. which again I assume is the male equivalent of the menopause. Do you think is that a real thing? I mean, I do think if I was a woman, I'd be biting my lip at this moment and thought these flipping men who think they can latch on to what for us is a clear and obvious physical change to be dealt with. They haven't got anything like that to worry about.
Do you know what? They would be right, but it is real. It is real, but it's not as real or as profound. That's why, and that is my favourite chapter, menopause versus menopause. Most of the chapter is Jane's eloquent writing about the menopause and her experience and how she's helped lots of women. But I do get to menopause at the end, at the end of the chapter, and there is a clearly defined U-curve dip in, happiness among men that no one can explain, that we experience in our 40s. And then when we reach our 60s, we're suddenly happier again. So we try and treat it slightly with kid gloves, or slightly with tongue in cheek, but it is real, but not as real.
Right, yes, I think I know what you mean, yes. Is it anything to do, you see, I'm wondering, with the fact that for the first time when we're 45 or 50, we're probably looking forward to retirement, or I don't mean looking forward necessarily, I can't wait for it, but, whether we want it or not, it is now on the horizon. And I think even today, men perhaps are a bit more work-driven and women are a bit more...
You're so right.
All the different aspects of life, yeah.
Bill, that was one of the big conclusions or research findings from the book, is that men's happiness tends to be tied up with their work, their sense of purpose, their sense of identity, where women have a far more holistic view of how. Now, I'm being very generalistic, generally,
of course you are, yeah.
But it was a startling finding from the book, to be honest. Right. And one of the other things is that between 25 and 40% of people who've retired are in the process of unretiring. That's 25% in the UK and 40% in the US. And so the book was going to originally be called The R Word, because it was a word that we're not allowed to use around here, because I'm never going to retire.
Right.
In fact, when I was 55, suddenly the world seemed to be telling me to go and sit in a corner somewhere and don't forget the Viagra and the Tenormin adult nappies.
And as I keep reminding Campbell, women don't retire.
Yes, exactly.
Traditionally, that is certainly true. And of course, today, there's no question, even today, they do more than 50% of the domestic stuff, don't they? So, what seems to be terribly unfair on them, you could say is actually a bit of luck in the long term then, couldn't you?
Oh, there's a conversation.
Couldn't you, Jane? Aren't you lucky, Jane, to be a woman?
No comment, Bill. No comment.
All right, in that case, we shall pause for a song and come back and do part 2 of this lovely chat. Campbell and Jane McPherson have written You Part 2, and part 2 we shall have after Phil Collins and Susudio on BBC Radio Berkshire. BBC Radio Berkshire, Phil Collins and Susudio. 20 past 12, Bill here until 2, talking at the moment to Campbell and Jane McPherson, who have written You Part 2, a guide to navigating through our middle years. One thing I wanted to ask you both is how easy or hard you think us midlifers have it today compared with previous generations. What would you say about that?
How easy or hard? It's certainly different. If I think back to, or if you think back to your grandparents, they looked old when we were, when they were in their 50s.
Yeah.
So they acted old. They retired at 65 and they dutifully died soon after. Mm-hmm. And or their wife was left to live off the pension. So I think we have just a completely different attitude. Do we have it tougher? Well, we're certainly living for longer. So there's a challenge that we need to meet, because it's not about living longer. It's about living well for longer.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and of course, going back to people, the very fact that we all live longer, we are the sandwich generation with ageing parents who often need a lot of looking after, and God bless them, Nan and Grandad didn't have that. That's a big one which we've already discussed.
That's true.
Yeah,
and that's one of the parts of the book for our own purposes, really. Part 4 is called Our Parents Aren't Getting Any Younger, and it's helping to describe and navigate the labyrinth that is aged care, because we were interested in it. We needed to know. It was the best way to find out.
And it is a labyrinth.
Yeah, they had all kinds of drudgery, didn't they? You know, they were much less likely the men to have an interesting and rewarding job. The women less likely to have a job at all, other than back-breaking work at home. You know, beating a rug on the washing line rather than having a vacuum cleaner. Things that we all take for granted. How well do you think? How much does that matter in terms of whether you're happy and whether you're really having a harder or an easier life, even though it might seem a hard life?
I think that's true. I mean, I had this conversation with my mother about, we've got all these appliances to supposedly give us more time, and so why do we feel that we're so time poor?
Yeah.
We certainly, my mother didn't have emails 24/7 to get back on. She didn't have sort of the technology, of course, in her when she was in her sort of mid 40s, 50s, which can be amazing, but also can be, a curse as well, because we are on call all the time, and I think that even when we go on holiday, we take our phones with us, we take our work with us. So you could argue that actually it's not so great, So I think it depends, doesn't it? As always, on your attitude and also your situation financially, health-wise. There are so many things that actually will define how our second half is.
Tell us a bit about you two. Why are you the people to help us with all this? What are your credentials?
Well, that's a good question. We discovered something writing this book that we should have known, but for some reason didn't, is that we do very similar things. You see, I help leaders to lead change and with my books and workshops and that sort of thing, and help them to build change-ready cultures and help employees to embrace change in the office. But what Jane does through her yoga in a far more profound way is to help individuals, and we worked out we were doing the same sort of thing.
Yeah, so I would tend to help individuals who are facing challenges, whether it be physical or mental. So yeah, we realised actually we're helping people navigate through change in their lives.
It's not your
purpose, and
not your first book together. Is it your second book you've written together? I'm fascinated at couples who work together in any aspect, really. But writing a book is such a singular thing normally.
Well, it is. My first book was just me. In the second book, I wanted to put in a chapter about yoga and change. So that chapter was called The Power of Yoga, and we literally sat down with the phone in front of us. And I said, Jane, tell me about change. And then she took that transcript and wrote probably the best chapter in the second book. And this is my third and Jane's second, I suppose. But actually, writing it together was what ended up being very good for our relationship, and it could have been touch and go.
Yes, oh, absolutely.
we had lockdown to do as well. We were able to have some time actually to sit down and write it together and rewrite it and rewrite it and rewrite it and proofread it for each other and we
never
were lucky,
a crossword.
Actually,
Marvelous.
Not at all.
Not one.
No.
Oh, go away! I don't like you anymore.
I wish. No, it was absolutely not plain sailing. And what I don't want anybody to think is that we've got it all sorted, because we absolutely do not.
That's half the fun.
It's just, this is a book based on our experience with our clients and with ourselves, and how we are trying to navigate change ourselves.
Really nice to have you on the programme. Thank you both so much. Good luck, Campbell and Jane McPherson, whose book is You Part 2. We've got the weather, travel and a sport update on the way after Ed Sheeran with Overpass Graffiti. It's BBC Radio Berkshire.